Welcome to Leaders of Tomorrow, the series that celebrates the spirit of entrepreneurship of micro, small and medium enterprises. The Indian MSME sector accounts for 45% of the manufacturing output of the country and is the second largest employment generator after agriculture. It produces over 8,000 different kinds of products and numerous services for world markets. How can Indian MSMEs compete more effectively in world markets? How can they collaborate to beat global competition? And what do they need to change to become the preferred choice of developed nations? Tonight on MSME Dialogues, we are attempting to answer all of these questions and lots more. So please welcome the panel tonight. Vinny Mehta, Director General, Automotive Component Manufacturers Association of India or ACMA. RP Singh, Secretary General, Quality Council of India. Vinod Sharma, Chairman CII National ICTE Manufacturing Committee and Managing Director at Deki Electronics. And from Mumbai, we are joined by Sanjay Agarwal, Partner and Head of Enterprise and Family Business, KPMG. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for joining us on Leaders of Tomorrow. Welcome, Sanjay. It's a pleasure to have you with us tonight from Mumbai. So perhaps I'm going to open the discussion with the consultant on the panel tonight. Your views on what are the typical trends that you see in the manufacturing space as far as MSMEs are concerned with respect to manufacturing practices at the moment?
Well, when we work with a lot of the family companies and small and medium businesses, we find that most of these businesses inherently are extremely competitive. They have a very inherent competitive trait within them. The big trend we see is when do they bring this inherent strength to bear. So we find mostly that they don't change on their own. They're either forced by their customers to change and become competitive, or they are forced by the regulatory practices to change. For example, in pharma, over the last few years, India has become the largest US FDA manufacturing plants in India, right? So the regulator has forced both globally and in India a change. Similarly, in automotive, the customers have driven most of these manufacturing suppliers of components to change. So that is a big trend that we see.
Okay, so you're saying they are not inherently very competitive unless they are forced to become competitive. Let's get the entrepreneur's perspective on that. Would you agree, Vinod?
I'm glad to start by disagreeing with Sanjay. Small companies survive because they have to. And so finally, when you put your own money and your own skin in the game, I think that's the biggest trigger for competitiveness.
All right. So while we are talking of competitiveness, Mr. Singh, how would you define competitiveness for a micro, small or a medium enterprise? Of course, there is the quality, there is productivity of employees, perhaps innovation. What else would you add to that bucket list?
See, quality, according to me, is ingrained into competitiveness. But when I have to define competitiveness, I would say that if there is a micro, small and medium scale enterprise which earns more than the similar kind of organization in the vicinity, it is more competitive.
Right.
So for me, it eventually decides how you are conducting your business so as to improve your profitability and become a part of the global value system.
Okay.
So if that is happening within the structure that you have got, within the ecosystem of similarly placed organizations,
right,
then according to me, that MSME is more competitive.
Okay. And Vinny, what is the single biggest drawback that you think the MSME sector in India needs to address in order to become globally competitive?
When you look from the auto component industry or the automotive industry in general, I think a huge gap that is sort of there, I think is the quality. I guess it's the underlying factor for being competitiveness. Again, it's a huge value chain. The automotive value chain in the country is very, very huge. Anywhere in the world, it's very, very huge. While you may not be able to paint everybody in the same brush, but definitely quality is one area that we really need to work on very, very hard.
Okay, and the Quality Council of India is trying to do a lot in that space. So the MSME sector is largely fragmented, it's an unorganized sector. At QCI, what's your biggest challenge in trying to enforce this whole nationwide movement of quality that you want to do?
In fact, that is the biggest advantage that we have. So for me, the biggest opportunity is that in a unstructured, fragmented kind of a system, how and why should you intervene so as to bring competitiveness? And the only way, as Vinny said, you could do that is by improving the quality of the systems, processes and procedures so that the competitiveness increases. As I said earlier also, for me, competitiveness would mean profits for any small, medium, micro enterprise. And therefore, what we are trying to do is that we are trying to suggest various interventions of quality at every stage that the MSME is. We call it the zero defect, zero effect model, which would ensure that the product and processes and systems that you put in ensures that the product that you are making is without any defect. And at the same time, if you have to move to the global value chain, you should not affect the environment adversely.
Okay.
So that is the entire ecosystem that we are trying to build.
Right. And I am going to come to the environment aspect in just a bit, but pulling in Vinod at this point, one of the things that the government has increasingly been talking about is the ease of doing business and improving the ease of doing business for India, whether it's companies of any scale or any business. On ground, how much has really happened in, say, the last 2 years or so?
Unfortunately, very little. What the Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister has done for the startups actually needs to be done for the entire MSME sector. And believe you me, I don't think that the government will lose too much. But if you begin to regulate everything we do, from the land to the electricity to the water to the pollution to goods that come in and go out, the excise, the VAT, it's a nightmare. If you do a simple survey of how much time do MSME entrepreneurs spend on improving the quality of their own product or processes, you will find it's very little, because they're spending a great deal of that dealing with the government in some form or the other. So while intentions are good, I think we need to move beyond that if we really want to see.
But if you don't enforce all of this, then is the MSME sector going to adhere to, if it's not mandatory, for instance, to comply with environmental norms, is an MSME going to invest time or money on that?
Good question. There is no one answer. So whatever we have put in, whatever norms, there will always be some black sheep. There will be some companies that will not fall in line. What is happening today is for us to try and bring that one person or one company in, we are actually putting the whole lot of millions of these companies into deep trouble. And the cost of that is actually eroding our competitiveness. So I think there is a lot that we can do. We need to change the complete mindset.
Sanjay, Mr. Singh was talking a little bit about making MSMEs competitive enough to be able to contribute to global value chains. But is the domestic opportunity as big as the global opportunity? And do you think MSMEs should first be looking at domestic opportunities rather than aspiring to become, part of the global value chains?
So I think both the opportunities are pretty exciting. I think it's not either or. I think from a sector perspective or from each individual company perspective, it depends on what works for them in the short term and what will work for them in the medium term. I think the whole issue is not just about the product quality. The issue is at the right quality, at the right price, available at the right time. I think the time issue is very important for India, both in the domestic markets and global markets. But I think there are two issues. I heard the panel on profitability of SME, but I think it is more about sustainability. If the competitive manufacturing practices make them sustainable and their ability to scale, then they will be really competitive to supply both in the domestic and global markets.
Okay. So acquiring that ability to scale, one of the aspects that can help in that respect is lean manufacturing. In the auto sector, Vinny, how much of that is relevant to MSMEs and how much of that are they able to adopt?
I think lean manufacturing is an element or an aspect of quality, and the automotive sector well realizes this. You'll be very happy to note that almost a third of the production of the component sector gets exported. So we are very well aware of the global quality practices. We are very well adept, and we are able to adapt ourselves to whether it's a quality standards or practices for the Japanese market or for the Korean market or for the European market or even for the American market, and accordingly we've been delivering. But yes, again, MSME remains a challenge because they may not have as much of a bandwidth to invest, so you need to create a sustainable model, and not just sustainable from an environment perspective, but from an perspective where there is an investment that can happen for them to scale up, upscale, and as I mentioned to you earlier on, getting investments in the sector is a huge issue. The cost of capital is so high in this country, and unfortunately 80% of the component industry does not return the cost of capital. So there's a huge challenge there.
All right. So we are going to talk a little more about challenges and lots more, but at this point, let's take a short break. On the other side, we'll talk about the impact that technology can create on competitiveness and learn more about the National Manufacturing Competitiveness Program for MSMEs. Stay with us on Leaders of Tomorrow MSME Dialogues. Welcome back to Leaders of Tomorrow MSME Dialogues. On the show tonight, we are talking about increasing manufacturing competitiveness for MSMEs. Vinod, the Government of India has several initiatives for increasing competitiveness, and one of them is the National Manufacturing Competitiveness Program. What are the key benefits that MSMEs can really leverage under this program, and at the grassroots level, is it really impactful?
Okay. First, just a word about competitiveness as we actually experience it or the lack of it within MSME sector in the manufacturing environment. We are realizing more and more that since globalization is now a reality, the competitiveness of one firm or enterprise alone is not that relevant, because our global competition, especially from the sector that I come in, electronics, where the tariffs are down to zero in most items, which means that you have to either be globally competitive or not survive at all. It's a question of a whole value chain that is either competitive or not. So now we find that we have really a positive ecosystem emerging in most sectors,
right,
because the government realizes the opportunity, is really working at least at the central level and in some states at the state level in trying to eliminate those challenges.
right.
Coming to the program itself, I think it's the biggest, in my opinion, the competitiveness, the value of that competitiveness lies in us being able to do our own value activities in a much integrated fashion.
Right.
So whether it is how little the inventory has to be, cash flow, I mean, Vinny just mentioned, the cost of capital in this country is one of the highest amongst most manufacturing countries,
yeah,
and will remain so in spite of all the good work being done by the RBI and the government. Having done that, we need to be far more efficient, maybe twice as efficient, in managing our logistics, our inventories, our supply chains.
Because despite the environment, businesses
Right.
have to exist and
Absolutely.
have to.
That's right. So I think the programs like this are really designed to be able to help us to do that as companies and as supply chains.
Right.
Of course, what is missing, I find, so you said what is on the ground, I think the larger companies need to play a far more hand-holding role than even the government. If you look at one thing about the cash flow I mentioned, large companies are turning in far better inventory ratios than small.
Right, and I was just going to come to that. Key public-private partnerships that are really required in order to drive this whole competitiveness agenda. Vinny, would you like to take on that?
Traditionally, the industry has been what is called as a build-to-print industry. Our customer, who is probably a vehicle manufacturer, would give us a design, and we manufacture to his specification. We are a build-to-print industry, but those days are gone now. The customer now takes a black box approach and says, hey, I need a solution. Can you give me a solution? Now, then I have to move to what's really a productization space, okay? And that's a huge challenge, because last year the spend in the industry in India on R&D was just about 0.5%. Globally, if you look at a competitive industry or a competitive nation where there's a thriving automotive industry, the spend would be 5 to 6% of the GDP. So to move to the next level of the value chain where I have to create my own products, maybe an intervention of creating a fund for R&D would be very critical for the industry. So that is one area we would definitely need a government intervention. And again, I mean, if the government were to give me an X amount of funding, or for a company it would give an X funding, I guess the company should match as much, go in a partnership manner, and I guess that's really a need of the hour, because in the automotive industry we're going through a lot of changes. We're going through a metamorphosis where suddenly you have change in emission norms, you're moving to a different fuel grade from BS4 standards to BS6 standards, you're looking at a lot of new safety to come into to make safer vehicles. I guess that requires a lot of innovation and R&D. And again, we are well known for frugal R&D and frugal product creation, and given a chance, probably if we were successful or we are successful, I guess we would make excellent products for the world. I mean, in the vehicle space, we're already doing. Quid by Renault is an excellent example of what can happen from scratch in India, you know, and they're building some of their global strategies based on these products. So there are many such examples in the automotive space where the products are entirely Indian, and again, it's the frugal Indian engineering that has been harnessed for these purposes.
Yeah, sure enough. Frugal innovation, yes, one aspect of increasing competitiveness. Mr. Singh, Quality Council of India is also working closely with a lot of sectors, not just auto. So give us a sense of what is the scenario like in other sectors, which are the ones that are going to be clearly driven by MSMEs, and you know, provided that MSMEs are competitive enough in those sectors.
Almost all the Make in India sectors, all the 25, will in fact rise up the global value chain. And in fact, the government is not doing something for a one specific sector. What it is doing is that it is building up the ecosystem. As the panelists talked about, see, when we talk about startups or when we talk about ease of doing business, these are all part of the ecosystem. MSMEs are nothing but an startup. Maybe some of Vinod just said that he is not able to see a lot of changes that are happening. But the thing is, sometimes, you know, when you are ingrained into the system, the changes that are happening around you, you may not appreciate it. But for people who are getting into the business right now, whether it is a startup, whether it is a MSME, they are seeing the changes. They are seeing the changes because whatever they had heard, whatever was their perception, is not what they are experiencing. And that is where the maximum amount of change is happening. And that is where the young people are getting into the system in order to build the global value chains. When we talk about the changes that are permeating across the MSME sector, we do not talk about the national requirement or global requirement. We say that India has to move to a system by which we will have to start manufacturing at the global or international standard. Right. Because there cannot be different standard for the domestic market
the country and outside,
and different standard for the. So if we start doing that, then we can improve competitiveness of the Indian industries in the global value chain in the next 5 or 7 years.
Okay. So, Sanjay, one of the things that, of course, businesses of our times have had at their advantage is technology and advent of newer kinds of technologies. So, going forward, as far as manufacturing MSMEs are concerned, potentially what are going to be the game-changing technologies, and you know, how do you see them pushing competitiveness for the MSME sector?
So I think there are two parts. The one part is the technology itself, which is changing and offering an advantage for Indian companies. I'll explain that in a minute. And the second part is the manufacturing practices. So on the technology side, what is happening is that there were certain countries who had a head start, right? And Indian entrepreneurs or manufacturing MSMEs had to do a catch-up. But now with technological changes, Indian entrepreneurs or MSMEs have a chance to absorb new technologies rather than compete on the old technologies and be more relevant, right? So across sectors, there would be, you know, different types of technological innovations in how to manufacture a product, how to do reactions in chemicals, how, you know, even in automotive, there is so much of smart technologies that are going into cars now, and India already has an advantage from the, you know, ITS perspective. So there is an opportunity to absorb new technologies faster or at the same rate as the global companies and then be competitive. But I think more importantly, where MSMEs are missing out is giving due importance or giving enough importance to manufacturing practices. I think if you look at Japan, Germany, Korea, some of these countries, while they focused on technology, they also gave equal weightage to manufacturing practices. And I think in India, that is one area where I would say, do take the advantage of new technologies, but don't make the mistake of not investing enough on manufacturing practices. Combine both, and that will give you the competitiveness.
So we are running out of time. So I'm going to ask each one of you for one tip for aspiring MSME entrepreneurs who aim to reach the global value chain. Vinny, perhaps we'd begin with you.
Stay put. That's about it.
Okay. Stay put, survive first.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Singh, your tips for the MSME entrepreneur who's aspiring to join global value chains?
We would suggest that every MSME entrepreneur must focus on quality of the processes and the systems, because that is going to create value in the long run, and that would make them enter into the global value chain.
Okay, so keep an eye out on quality, you would say.
Yeah.
Vinod?
For me, I find that instead of the cost competitiveness that we discussed a lot about, there is also the value competitiveness. So if we keep our ears to the ground, the Indian consumer or customer is very different from the global customer. There is this chance of innovating, frugally innovating, and being able to provide that value to that customer.
Keep your eye on value. Sanjay Agarwal, your tip for the aspiring MSME entrepreneur who wants to be a part of global value chains?
I would recommend very strongly to invest in good manufacturing practices and creating a good work practice culture. It may not give returns in the short term, but in the medium term, it will definitely give competitive advantage. So manufacturing practices and work culture is extremely important.
All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us tonight. Thanks, Sanjay. It's a pleasure that you could join us. And with that, it's a wrap on Leaders of Tomorrow MSME Dialogues. Hope you enjoyed the insights on increasing competitiveness for your business. Do write in to us with all your thoughts, ideas, or feedback at leadersoftomorrow@timesgroup.com, or reach us using social media by putting in the hashtag LOT, or just call us on the number flashing on your screen. Thanks for joining us. Goodbye and good night.